come vape with me. I want to tell you how it was like when I was young. And it's important to keep this knowledge alive because the world we live in today is so changed and so completely different that young people don't know these things. Young people, young vapors, young smokers haven't a clue of what it was like before. Before what, you might ask? Well, before society became so intensely bent on changing us. It's a sort of new phenomenon. It's started because marketing is what we are all exposed to nowadays. Marketing. The tobacco companies started it really in the 50s, and they did wondrous marketing. They marketed their products to everybody. And so they marketed that smoking was sexy, smoking was manly, smoking was the thing that everyone should do. And smoking had advantages. It relaxed you. It kept you thin. Smoking had so much to offer. And that is what big tobacco offered us. Now, I'm a child of that generation. And everybody seemed to smoke. Well, not quite everybody, but loads of people smoked. In fact, even people that you wouldn't expect to smoke, like the vicar or the nuns. I went to a convent, but they also smoked. Isn't that strange? We grew up understanding that smoking was a natural, normal thing that you did in your life. And so everywhere you went, people smoked. We smoked in nightclubs, at the races, at parties, inside your house, inside everybody's house, whether there were babies or children present, because that is what happened. And people enjoyed smoking. And then after some years, gradually messages came down. Education came through. It was written about more and more that smoking had negative effects as well as positive effects. And the negative effects outweighed the positive. And so it was a desirable thing to stop smoking. And I remember that. I remember having meetings, teachers' meetings. I was a teacher. Teachers' meetings, actually. The room was full of smoke. Everybody smoked at a teacher's meeting. You smoked in the playground. You smoked in the staff room. And even some teachers smoked in the classroom. However, nowadays that seems so gross because of how we've been brainwashed that smoking is a terrible, terrible, terrible thing. In fact, smokers nowadays are treated worse than any minority group. They are constantly persecuted. They may not smoke indoors anymore. They may not even smoke out of doors. And we've been told that secondhand smoke has been the most ghastly thing for the rest of the population, and they mustn't come near it. It's sort of instant death if you even breathe in the slightest whiff of secondhand smoke. These dangers have been totally overemphasized by tobacco control. When big tobacco was actually promoting smoking, they told very bad lies, really. And they didn't make smoking safer, but they brought out things like filter tips and low tar cigarettes which you smoked more of, and all sorts of tricks which weren't honest. Well, anti-tobacco has become just as evil and just as vile, really, as big tobacco was. They use marketing constantly, and of course we are all bombarded with marketing the whole time. So anti-tobacco markets their ideas of how smoking should be eradicated forever in the whole wide world. Well, they haven't actually got to grips with the fact that humans have smoked something ever since we began. It seems weird to me that a small minority of people who hated smoking and who actually could see how marketing was causing society to smoke more, and smoking was an epidemic because of the marketing, have now marketed themselves so much that in fact not smoking has become the norm, and smokers have been shunted off into the corners of society and out into the worst areas and have to collect in groups on the street where they are more noticeable to society, whereas before they were inside, more or less invisible to society. The anti-tobacco crowd have demonized nicotine, and so now so many doctors in the UK, and I don't know about the USA, believe that nicotine causes cancer. They actually believe that. I noticed people talking about smoking. They muddle having a cigarette and having an addiction to cigarettes and having an addiction to nicotine. But as a vapor, I find that the nicotine is not the thing that addicts you to vaping or smoking, because it is not that addictive. It's strange, when I was smoking and I couldn't have a cigarette, I'd go bananas. I could murder somebody. I would go to any length to get outside or have a cigarette, or a plane trip was absolutely horrendous. And the first thing I'd do is rush to the smoking room, because in those days you actually had a smoking room. There was some consideration for smokers. And I'd have a cigarette with all the other people rushing there to have a cigarette, because in the cigarette there are chemicals that addict you to the smoke from the cigarette. In vapor there is the nicotine but not the smoke. So let me tell you furthermore what I've noticed. So I have the wisdom of having lived in a time when everybody smoked. It was a normal thing to do. Now we have this complete turnaround. So it's like living in an alien world for us oldies. We don't understand how this terrible thing, anti-tobacco, has suddenly overcome the Western world like a terrible, mean tsunami that has flattened smokers, gives them absolutely no rights, doesn't accommodate them in any way, taxes cigarettes. In the UK, it's 85% of the money that you spend on a packet of cigarettes goes to the government. It's total greed. And now anti-tobacco in England want to tax cigarettes further, and that money is to be given to them to continue with their persecution of a minority group of society. In fact, in the UK, still about 20% of people smoke, and they get no consideration whatsoever. So I'm always defending the rights of smokers to smoke because it's a thing they do. It's not a heinous crime. And why should we, in the now modern age, stop it? Anti-tobacco have done nothing to make smoking safer, which they could have by legislating against the additives that tobacco companies put in their cigarettes. A lot of those additives are addicting. But they didn't do anything like that. They simply said you have to quit or die. And that is a very unfortunate marketing tool that they have used, and they've demonized nicotine. Now I am a vapor, and I didn't like what the tobacco control movement was doing against smokers when I was smoking, and I certainly think they are showing up all their bad, evil side in how they are demonizing vaping. Because their fear, I think, is that we will start vaping and vaping will be as common as smoking once was. I think that's their fear. That's what they mean when they say renormalizing smoking. But in actual fact, people have smoked for so long that smoking has always been normal to somebody. Vaping is a substitute for smoking. I don't see vaping as a quit mechanism, though you could say I am a non-smoker, but in my head I am a smoker. I'm still a smoker, but I vape. And there's a big difference about being a vapor that vapes, that scorns and derides and spits on smokers and regurgitates all the rubbish and gobbledygook that the marketing brainwashed us with, there's a difference to being a smoker that vapes. And I'm a smoker that vapes. And smokers need consideration. We have been dumped now by anti-tobacco, tobacco control, into the group of smokers. And I think we're finding it very difficult because some young vapors have no knowledge of the old times. They were brought up, they're the sort of first generation of people who despised smoking. They smoked and despised themselves. And if you smoke, I suggest you throw away the guilt. Somebody, professor, when I was doing psychology, and I nipped out the side at the back of the shed, this was in the 70s, to have a cigarette round the back, and he came upon me, and I threw the butt underneath this shed where we were, and he said, no. He said, you're guilty. The guilt will cause more damage to you than the actual smoke from a cigarette. They've engineered society to feel guilty and ashamed and shame. I refuse to feel that because the shame and the guilt is destructive to yourself physically and mentally. But young vapors, a lot of them have that, and they are proud because they are vapors, and they don't do the stinkies, they don't smell, they have other derogatory remarks to make about smokers. Funnily, I know a lot of smokers who do not smell at all. I think a lot of the modern cigarettes have got chemicals in them to stop them or to make them burn longer or burn shorter or something. And those chemicals are making cigarettes smell worse than they ever did in the past. And those who roll their own cigarettes, they don't seem to smell as much as commercial cigarettes. I have no hatred against big tobacco because I was a consumer. and for many years they provided me, the cigarettes I bought from them provided me great joy and pleasure. I more dislike tobacco control because they came in as a good thing. People who were concerned about our health. Now I see it's got nothing to do with health. They are a self-perpetuating industry, really. It's become an industry. There are so many jobs available in all the anti-smoking groups. And those people have to continue their persecution of smoking on this mission to stop anybody smoking, to have a smoke-free world worldwide. That gives lots of jobs for lots of people, lots of discomfort, and even upsetting the economy by ridiculous regulation that they lobby for, that has made misery for thousands and thousands, emotional misery for thousands of people, millions of people, especially people, older people of my age group, who once did a normal thing and who are now told they may not do this anymore. They have to quit or die. And a lot of older people think, well, I'll carry on because I'm going to die anyway in the next 20 years or something. So I might as well, because we all die. We all die in the end. And if smoking and vaping gives pleasure, we don't have to suffer the enormous grief in stopping using our old friend, smoking, cigarettes. Cigarettes were our friends. Now, for me, I have changed to vaping, and it's extraordinary that I prefer vaping to smoking. I prefer it. I prefer it because I tried it. And the other thing is that it gives me the same wonderful, special pleasure that smoking has always given me. So I haven't had to suffer the enormous grief of losing a friend and going into a totally miserable life, as I've seen smokers who quit. They quit because they're ashamed, or there's pressure, or their wives nag, or somebody's nagging them, or they're feeling guilty because of what they're reading in the press, or they feel, oh bother, it's such an effort to find a place to have a cigarette, I'll just give it up. And in fact, the quitting can induce huge feelings of grief that they have to work through. And that isn't necessary because the vaping replaces smoking. It's a substitute for smoking, and one does not have to endure the dreadful grief of losing something that has been your best friend throughout your life. So young vapers have no understanding of this. They don't see how evil the tobacco control groups are. They don't see how society has changed from being relaxed. There are good changes that have happened, but there are some bad changes that have happened. And there's a change in how society accepts people. We're all told we need to be politically correct and we mustn't bully people. There must be no sentiments in our minds that are judgmental about any kind of people that are different to us, except if they're smokers. And that is the most evil aspect of this whole thing to me. And thanks for watching this video and vaping with me.